Thank you for having me, and thank you for attending this evening live. And I have some presentation slides I'm going to share with you here, but I really, especially with the group size we do have here today, would really welcome any open comments and questions throughout throughout this time we have together, because that will help us know exactly what you're looking for. So just to confirm, I just want to make sure you are seeing the PowerPoint here presentation. Okay, sounds
Yep.
good.
Yep. We're
So just a
seeing it.
little bit about ourselves before I get going, because the webinar is recorded as well, which is perfectly fine. Just a disclaimer, I don't have to read it all to you, but basically it's anything here is not for legal advice. If you're looking for legal advice, you can contact an attorney directly. I personally am not an attorney. FEWA is an association, does employ legal counsel that we do, refer to as needed. So the Federation of Employers and Workers of America, we're a national nonprofit association that assists employers across the country that are utilizing the federal guest worker programs. There's two different programs that we work with specifically. The one we're going to be talking about is going to be the H-2A federal guest worker program for agricultural purposes in itself. The other program is very similar, which is H-2B, which is for non-agricultural purposes. So I'll just jump right in and really touch base a little bit about why we are seeing the impact of labor across the country in our current labor market. And just a few slides on, data. I don't have to tell you how tight the labor market is. I think everybody knows, but it's a little real interesting to see, and this is kind of just data from the entire calendar year of 2022 from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And you can see the amount of jobs versus workers open right now. Very important. If every unemployed person in the country found a job, we'd still have 5 million open jobs. And that was last year, and we're continue seeing that growing, and we'll have those numbers as we finish up the end of calendar year 2023. But every state is showing the impact. We can see here, I think Jersey is in the yellow, showing the percentage of increase in the amount of workers. And this is going back to 2020, kind of the COVID years, and seeing how much we've evolved since then, and that unemployment going down. So you can see every industry, every state, and this is, you as in the agricultural industry have to compete with, all of these states and every different industry. You walk in, you see hotels, restaurants, construction, truck drivers. How does one agricultural employer that has a temporary need for workers compete with those different industries that are experiencing the same type of labor shortage as you are, and many times have the resources in order to, pay a higher wage or have a year-round position? So first of all, that's what these programs really came about. And it was back in the early 90s, or for the H-2A program, late 80s, in regards to having federal guest worker programs for seasonal employment. So one of the basic requirements for the H-2A program is to be able to prove that you have a temporary seasonal need. The general rule of thumb is around 10 months maximum to be able to prove your need. It can be tailored to exactly when you need the workers. There's some farmers that are picking berries for 2 months out of the year, or 4 weeks out of the year. Just really depends on what you're doing, and that certification that you're applying for can be tailored to exactly when you need the workers for your specific season or growing season. So why do employers utilize the H-2A program? We were talking briefly about this before we went live, but we're finding more and more employers that are kind of stuck in a hard place because of the labor market, and bringing over fewer workers, 2-3 workers for their entire season. And one of the biggest benefits of applying for this program, and we'll talk a little bit about cost, and we're going to talk about a lot of the requirements and obligations, some of the major requirements and obligation employer has to go through that you can know of before jumping into this program, because it's not cheap, it's time consuming, but the long-term effect is having those loyal, stable, repeat workforce. If you can have the same 2, 3, 5 workers back year after year, and we've been doing this for personally been doing this for over 20 years, we've seen workers come back for many years in a row, and that's your biggest benefit. There's an abundant labor supply when you're tapping into the foreign labor market. You reduce your training costs because you're having those same workers back year after year. The employees can only work for your company. There is opportunities for them to file for change of employer or extensions and those types of things But when they're sponsored by your company, their work authorization initially is authorized for your employment only. And again, they can travel freely across the border multiple times in multiple entries. One of the benefits for these employees is that if they, they may have family emergencies where they need to return home and visit, their family, or because they're leaving their family to come over and work for you. This allows them multiple entries to travel freely across the border, so if they're traveling here, for example, undocumented, they don't have that luxury. They can't go back and forth and, continue to risk their lives and just amount of money it takes to get here. So it's a win-win program for both the workers because they like the opportunity to walking across the border. And you can bring as many or as few workers as you need. You can bring over one worker if you have that need for one individual, or if you have a need for 100 plus. It just really depends on how many individuals you can put on your payroll. So these are some of the benefits for employers to utilize the program. I want to go through some statistics from the 2022 season. Again, Department of Labor hasn't released the full calendar year 2023, but just to show you the amount of users throughout the United States that are utilizing the H-2A program. So you can see here, I've highlighted a few numbers. For the entire calendar year of 2022, there were over 371,000 workers that were certified by the U.S. Department of Labor. And what that means, and in order to obtain certification, is that you have proven to the U.S. Department of Labor that there are no U.S. domestic workers available to take those positions. You can see that number right above it, 382,000 plus. That's how many workers were petitioned for. 371 of those, 1,000 of those went unfulfilled with U.S. domestic workers, and that's why they obtained certification. So that is, continually growing. You can see the number, the percentage highlighted there. Based on 2021 numbers, there was a 15% growth in the agricultural program from 21 to 22. We expect very similar growth to the 2023 season, if not more. So this program is very widely used. We've also kind of just snapshot of the percentage of occupations that are currently utilizing the program. You can see for general agricultural labor, farm worker, crop, nursery is a majority of who is coming over. 62% of all those applications are falling into those categories. The next category is closest is ag equipment operators. So, your combine workers and those types of things. So it's a very good fit program for working in, in small nurseries or large nurseries and farmers in general. So just top 10 states of employment, you can see there as expected, in the big areas, Florida, California, Georgia, growing lots of fruits and vegetables there, but it's across the border. It can work for any state in the country. So the U.S. Department of Labor gets involved in applying the adverse effect wage rate. So this gives you an idea of what you would have to pay your H-2A workers in any of your corresponding employment workers. And we'll talk about that definition a little bit more in a later slide, but basically anybody doing the same job that's already currently working for you would have to be paid the same. You can see New Jersey there is currently for 2023 at $16.55 per hour. The average, averages out anywhere between $15 to $16 an hour, depending on where you're at in the country. But currently, New Jersey is $16.55. They do adjust these wages every January, so we will see a new set of wages coming next month for the 2024 season. And this is for most all agricultural job duties, because it's set for the entire year for the same job description. So why the program is so complex, and basically why the FEWA exists, is because there's 4 different governmental agencies involved. We talked a little bit about proving that you have a temporary seasonal need. You also have to test the local labor market, and that's what that certified means. The U.S. Department of Labor and the state workforce agency is going to be involved in helping you test the local labor market. Everything's done electronically now, but you're going to be required to publish help wanted ads to show what jobs you have available, how long they're available. It's going to publish the adverse effect wage rate that's available at that time. So any U.S. domestic worker willing and capable of taking that position has that opportunity. The state workforce agency may refer you some applicants. As long as we're giving them equal opportunity for those positions, then you could qualify for the program. They also refer that to the U.S. Department of Labor. The U.S. Department of Labor's role is not only to set the adverse effect wage rate, but also to be able to justify that you do have a temporary seasonal need. So there's some industries in the agricultural spectrum that do unfortunately cannot qualify because they do have a year-round need. Like if you're in the dairy business, for example, a lot of times they need workers, but they have a year-round need, so it's harder for them to prove that they do have seasonal demand. So the U.S. Department of Labor is going to make sure that your job request is temporary and seasonal. They're an advisory to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, who gives final approval and notifies the U.S. Department of State, which is going to be the consulate or embassy of where the workers are coming from. So it's kind of a two-phase approval. The employer has to go through this entire process in order to prove their need and prove that the foreign workers are not taking jobs away from willing, capable workers here in the United States. But also, once you're approved, the worker has to go through a digital fingerprinting process, photos, and at times interviews, making sure they're not a threat to national security and before they're getting stamped a visa to walk across the border. So that's why the whole process in itself takes at least 4 months to prepare prior to you need the workers. At times you can, do some emergency filings and try to get through in around 3 months, but you want to give yourself at least 4 months in order to prepare for your upcoming spring season. Now, I know the slide's kind of small, but I'll always like to throw this in just to kind of let you know, I know you can read the details, but you have to start on step one. And this is just with the U.S. Department of Labor. This is just one agency. So, the whole goal is to start at step one here and to get to the congratulations here at some point in time. And we have to go through these entire steps to get there, and working with just the U.S. Department of Labor. So this is what we help you through. We want to make sure that all the applications are filed timely, accurately, and justifying what your need is. So I want to highlight a couple of things here that I always like employers to know before you applying for the H-2A program. These are some of the things that you're going to have to do and sign off on attestations that you will be doing it. And basically, most of them are just protections for U.S. workers, but also making sure these foreign workers are treated fairly and they are not being misused in any way to shortify. We touched basically briefly on corresponding employment. Again, this is any U.S. domestic worker that is doing the same job duties that the workers, H-2A workers, will be doing, have to be provided with the same job opportunities that those individuals will. One includes the adverse effect wage rate, and two, we're going to talk about housing. But if they cannot reasonably return to their home on a daily basis, then you also have to offer them housing opportunities as well. There's a 3/4 guarantee. So what that means is that if you have a 10-month season and you're working 8 hours a week for 10 months, you're guaranteeing that they're going to get at least 75% of those hours. There are ways that if there's an act of God, if there's early snowstorm, a blizzard, or something that prevents you from working 75% of that contract or 3/4 of that contract, then you could petition to the U.S. Department of Labor to try to get to be allowed out of that contract. But basically, what they want to make sure of is that these employees that are coming over to work for you will have at least 75% of the hours that were offered to them during your recruitment period. And this goes the same for those corresponding workers as well. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Normally not an issue. Of course, we're only, like I said earlier, you want to petition for the start dates that best fits your need. That way they're coming over when your peak season begins, and when your season ends, they're going home. Outside the act of God, something of the act of God preventing you from completing that contract, then you could petition for the U.S. Department of Labor to get you out. Now that's why it's over the entire contracted period, so they understand that there's rainouts and there's weather delays, those types of things. But over the entire contracted period, they should be getting 3/4 of those hours. So another requirement that you will have to also for the H-2A workers and the corresponding workers is your transportation and subsistence expenses. So you will be required as an employer to reimburse the travel expenses from their place of recruitment. So if they're coming from Mexico, reasonable transportation could be a bus. If they're coming from Central America, overseas, naturally you'll be looking at an airfare for them. But whatever reasonable transportation costs, and then also their daily subsistence expenses in regards to food and overnight stay if it's required. In addition to that, for H-2A, you also have to provide them daily transportation from the work site from the employer provided housing to the work site at no cost to the individuals as well. And always keep in mind as we're talking about all these provisions is that goes the same with any corresponding worker. So if they are living at the house, provided housing, then you do have to provide them daily transportation. There's lots of farms and ranches that provide housing on site. So it's not an issue if they're living on site. So that daily transportation, there's no commute there. But still, you do have to offer that and make sure that that is available for them. We've had instances also where the employees choose not to take advantage of the employer housing or the employer transportation, but at all times it has to be available for them. So the housing, you have to provide it at no cost to the workers. Again, here's the corresponding employment who are not reasonably able to return to their residence within the same day. For example, when we're running the job openings with the State Workforce Agency, and the U.S. Department of Labor will also publish this on a national job registry. If somebody applies from Texas to go and work for you in New Jersey because they see your advertisement published online, it doesn't happen very often. But if somebody would want that position, then you do have to offer them that reimbursement of reasonable transportation costs, and then you have to offer them housing as well. So it's going to go public, and they cannot reasonably return to their house on a daily basis. So it doesn't happen often, like I said, but we have ran into this to where we see applicants at times from Puerto Rico, U.S. applicants, and they want to take advantage of the opportunity. So we just have to give them equal opportunity, the same as we would those H-2A workers. All the rental public accommodations must meet local standards. If you're using public rental housing, apartments or rental housing, they normally have contracts up to code to where they can already rent out to the public. If it's something on site, then you will have to go through inspections to make sure that they meet the qualifications and OSHA requirements there as well for any on-site housing. In regards to meals, many employers, it depends on the housing facilities. If you have kitchen facilities and cooking facilities within your housing that you're providing them, then you do not have to furnish them 3 meals a day, but you just have to furnish them free and convenient cooking and kitchen facilities. Some of the employers that have shorter seasons, it doesn't make sense if they're coming over and working 4 to 6 weeks out of the year to pick berries or fruit or vegetables, and and it's a shorter season, then they just have basically labor camps do that where they do not have cooking facilities, and it's easier for them to cater them 3 meals a day. So that's that scenario. But if you do have a house where they do have kitchen facilities, and you do not have to provide them meals as well. So I know I went through that a little quick in regards to those major requirements. And I'm going to flip back to that slide because I want to make sure that those are the only ones that we highlighted here today. By any means, this is not all of them. There's a couple of there that are not highlighted simply because it's pretty straightforward, and it's not a big financial burden on an employer. Basically no layoffs means that you cannot lay off U.S. workers prior to your H-2A workers, those types of things. They cannot be displacing U.S. workers. Notifications, if anybody is to separate from your employment early, then you simply have to notify the U.S. Department of Labor and Immigration. That's just kind of paperwork filing procedures. And then also deductions, everything has to be disclosed, of course, on their paycheck. Again, these are just the major requirements we feel like an employer needs to be aware of before you just kind of jump all in on the agriculture H-2A program, because there's a lot to it. I do recommend you do have someone assist you with filing those documents. Like I said, trying to get through that maze of of the 4 different governmental agencies. An employer could do it internally. Everything, all the information is available online. The forms are free online, those types of things, but timing becomes an issue. If you get many delays, then you just don't get the full impact of your entire season. So with that, I just want to turn it over to see if we have any questions. Hopefully I can clarify anything that I went through with you and help you there.
I don't want to take up anybody else's time, but I've got a handful of questions. Thank you for the presentation. So in speaking about proving the need of the workforce and also just maintaining a workforce, I guess I've got a couple questions on that. So what specifically is required for an employer to prove the need or the lack of available workforce? Is it ads posted for X amount of days with no legitimate leads? Does it get to the kind of nuanced nitty-gritty there?
Proving the temporary need is basically a simple explanation of what you're growing or what you need the agricultural workers to be doing and why it's seasonal demand. So that's just a simple explanation. Proving the testing of the labor market, we're all required and regulated on when we need to run the help wanted ads. Basically, it used to be a newspaper printing. Everything went electronically now, but we have to run it with the state workforce agency and the U.S. Department of Labor, and we have to report back to them on the amount of applicants that we did receive with a certain time frame. And if you're requesting 3 workers, if you receive 0 applicants, if you do hire 1 applicant based on that advertisement, then you basically get certified for 1 less worker that you're able to fulfill those positions with, and so forth. So they set the requirements in regards to when we have to post the ads online, and the state posts their local advertisement, and then the U.S. Department of Labor has their national job registry as well that they posted.
Gotcha. And then just natural attrition during the season. So if I have 10 local workers and 10 H-2A, and the locals just aren't working out, and 4 or 5 of them quit, does that have any implications on the 10 H-2A laborers that I'd have?
It does not. If they quit or they're fired for a cause, it does not. The only thing that you cannot do is if your season's slowing down early or whatever the case is, you cannot lay off U.S. domestic workers before you lay off your H-2A temporary guest workers. You can do layoffs, but your H-2A workers have to be laid off first.
Gotcha.
But if they quit or fired for cause, that's different.
Please, if anybody else wants to jump in, I don't want to own the floor.
Hi, yes, this is Babu Canero. It was a very nice, succinct talk, and thank you for that. I have a couple of questions. One is regarding the reimbursement of the expenses. I realize that the housing, if they cannot return to their place at night, you do have to provide housing. I get that. Suppose the transportation, let's say they're coming from South America and it's quite expensive. We still have to provide that transportation free of cost. That's one question. Second is, what if the temporary H-2A employee absconds and just goes off somewhere, and he or she doesn't come back the next day or cannot be traced? Are we as an employer liable for that? And would it affect our next year's application in getting certified workers?
That's a great question. The first one in regards to reimbursement of travel and transportation, yes, regardless of where they're coming from, even though it is more expensive for them to come from overseas, you will be required to reimburse them that travel. There's no other way around that, unfortunately. But in regards to a worker that does abscond, your only requirement, the regulations require you to notify the U.S. Department of Labor and Immigration if they do not report to work within 5 business days without any type of notification. So after that 5th business day, they're considered an absconded worker, and then there's no obligation outside of you sending an email to the Department of Labor and Immigration that there has been a separation of employment because they have absconded on you. And then you are no longer, of course, responsible for return transportation because you can't locate the worker anyway, the individual anyway. So that's the only thing that's different there.
And if such a thing were to occur, is there a penalty on the employer for next year's applicants?
No penalty from the employer. The only issue is that you cannot quickly replace that worker in regards to, without reapplying and get certification for that calendar year. So no, there's no penalty for the following season. It's just that you would be less one worker.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Arnulfo, can you talk about, I don't have a better way of saying this, but the matchmaking process? How that even works. I have no idea. Can you select which region or country your workers come from? How do you know you're going to be capable of managing them, the language barriers, so on and so forth? Even, is there a way to select H-2A workers that have experience in the field you're looking to fill, even though we see that 7% of all the H-2A labor is engaged in agriculture in some way? Is there any way to select somebody who knows citrus or somebody who knows nursery work?
Right. No, so there's a few ways you can go about recruiting your potential workers. One of the highly recommended way, if there's an opportunity here that we like to start at, is if you have any internal workforce that can recommend anybody from their home country. Not everybody has that opportunity, but you may have, even if they're not currently working for you, we may turn to your community suppliers. A lot of times we will turn to our network in our association that has members that have been coming over from years and years, because normally once you tap into that labor market, there's an overabundance of amount of people that want to come over and take advantage of that. That's a highly recommended way. It helps them, just kind of get settled in the area, in the community, if they know somebody there. There's also recruiting agencies. There's the U.S. Ministries that's involved in local countries like Guatemala and Central America, specifically Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. The local ministries are working with the USAID on setting up programs that allow for recruiting with agricultural backgrounds, specifically for these programs. A lot of times there'll be even some financial assistance with some of their travel and those types of things. So that would be the secondary option of going about recruiting those individuals. And then, and there's no charge for those because it's the local ministries working with the U.S. government for these specific programs, specifically trying to eliminate, the influx in the southern border and giving them a legal avenue of coming up from Central America and utilizing those visa programs that are available. Thirdly, there's, just kind of recruiting agencies out there that charge a fee and that can go and basically recruit in certain countries for you. But those are kind of the different FEWA specifically. We do not recruit, but we have, like I said, we have the contacts that work with the U.S. government in Central America, and then also we have the network that we can utilize within the association.
Yeah, that's good to know. I know one New Jersey farmer who actually takes the winter trip. I think it's Ecuador or Costa Rica. They just go down, they spend a month. I believe they get in touch with folks who are interested in working for them. I don't know what their process is like, but it sounds like there's a whole spectrum of how to go about recruiting based on your particular need.
Most definitely, yes. And on the individual side, outside of having to have a passport is all they really need to apply for the visa, to make sure that they qualify. Of course, they have to go through their background checks and those types of things, but that's all they need on their end is a passport to apply.
Can you go ahead, James?
I have a question regarding the countries that are involved with H-2A. So I know with the FLSP that's very specific to South and Central American countries, but is the program pretty open to anywhere, worldwide? And does the federal government have preference for South American or Central American workers, or is it pretty much non-preferential based on the country?
They release an approved country list that can apply for these programs. And there's several countries on there, not just Central America. So it's very widespread, and I'm happy to share that with you. I can pull it up and send it over to you after the fact, just so you can have it as a resource. But there's several countries on there. The preference right now is Central America, just with these different programs that are there to assist in recruiting. But there's many countries overseas that can qualify as well.
Okay, and this might be a question for later on when we get into the different programs, but is there a reason for the preference on Central and South American countries versus, let's say, India or South Africa?
Right now, it's really what this administration has been because of the influx in the southern border and illegal migration.
So basically creating legal pathways to reduce illegal migration.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay.
Can you touch on some of the things that might go on during the season? So I know you can't speak for every producer, every employer, and what the work-life balance and the culture of a farm operation might be. But what's expected of employers as far as when the workers are off the clock in making sure that their workers are taken care of? What can an employer expect as far as inspections or visits from regulatory bodies? Can you talk about what might be expected after the start of work and before they leave to return home?
Yes, most definitely. So you are going to be responsible also to make sure they have some types of means to get to run personal errands. You know, if you're having that daily commute, daily transportation, you also have to make that available to be able to get to the grocery store. If there's public transportation readily available, then they can utilize that, and that can be their own expense, but they still have to have some type of means, and we have to indicate that on the application itself. You know, at any time, of course, you know, we could also receive an audit. There's two different type of audits that we can see in regards to when utilizing this program. Normally, if a wage and hour officer was to show up, 9 times out of 10, that could be complaint driven, you know, because a worker's having a complaint and they have all the opportunities to report that to the U.S. Department of Labor. But also, there's another type of audit where they can basically send you a letter, and all they're really looking for there is to make sure that we tested the local labor market correctly, and then also going to be looking at your payroll records to make sure that these individuals are being paid correctly. On-site visit, as you can imagine, is going to be more lengthy. They're also going to be talking to the workers, and they're also going to be looking at the housing to make sure it's up to code, to make sure that they're following the inspection regulations there. But outside of that, they're 100% your employees. They get put on your payroll, you know, and pay all the appropriate taxes as an agricultural employee would.
Cool. And about the housing, let's say you have one H-2A employee. Does a room in a shared house with other ag workers suffice, or does it have to be dedicated standalone housing for the H-2A employee?
It doesn't have to be dedicated to them, but it does have to be vacant in order for them to be and do the inspection prior to the H-2A workers coming.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. And at that point, it still can be shared with your U.S., you know, with any corresponding workers that cannot do the daily commute. You know, it can be shared with them throughout the season, of course, because that's when you're obligated to provide that housing, whatever your season is dedicated for.
I have a question, I think related to kind of that corresponding labor. So my understanding is that, you know, with employment of H-2A workers, everyone in that, you know, hourly wage kind of category, whether domestic or H-2A, is paid equally. What happens? So in the case of a lot of small farms, there is oftentimes also a reliance on volunteer labor, whether that is through people who are shareholders through CSA, school groups that come through Boy Scout troops, etc. How does that work out with having unpaid labor in the form of volunteer work and H-2A workers?
The corresponding employment is going to be for anybody who's on your payroll, any paid laborers that you do have. So if they are doing the same or similar job duties, then they're required to be paid the same wage during that time period.
Okay, so it would kind of, for some instances, prohibit having volunteer labor on farm if they are doing the same kind of tasks.
Correct.
You know,
Yes. Yes. Same job duties. Same. Yes. During that seasonal need. Correct. Question.
Oh, and one other question, and this came up with just with a prior conversation. So again, in the case of smaller farms, I know that H-2A workers are tied to a single employer, correct, for the duration of that season. Are there any instances where two farm owners can hire a crew together and share that labor, or is it strictly through a single farm employer?
There's different ways that you can file the application with the U.S. Department of Labor. There's joint employment, but that also gets into a labor contractor model. So to where you're basically, someone is becoming the labor contractor to be able to provide to more than one farm owner or more than one farm location. It can be done and filed that way if the seasons are the same and they want to be working for both locations. But it's just the fact that you will be filing as a labor contractor rather than filing as a fixed site employer.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Another question about accommodations. Is that in general like a square foot, X number of square feet per person, or like X number of people to a room? Can you just give us some general guidelines about the living accommodation if we are providing it?
Yes, for sure. It is two people per room. There is a minimum amount of square footage, and also the housing, it needs to have a common area if they're going to be sharing a room that way. So a living room of some sort where nobody is sleeping or residing in that area. So I don't know the exact square footage. It really depends on when the house was built, because there's two different sets of regulations there. But there is a minimum square footage per individual, and it's maximum 2 people per room.
Could you tell us a bit about FEWA, about the history of the organization, about what your role is, about the services you provide the community, and how we can continue working with y'all if we need more support and guidance?
No problem. Yes. Well, my role is really to try to get the word out in regards to educating the community on the H-2A program in general. FEWA is a nonprofit association. We also have full-time lobbying firms that are advocating for these programs in Washington, D.C. And we talked about the legal team that's involved as well. But one of the individual services that we provide is, if you choose to file and participate in the H-2A program, you get assigned what we refer to as an FEWA guide that basically files all the documentation to every agency, every step of the way on your behalf to make sure that no deadlines are missed and everything is filed appropriately. So that's one of the core services that we provide in regards to the membership benefits. We do have offices in Mexico and Central America, so we do not outsource that portion of the process, Mexico and Central America, to where we can meet with your workers personally. We like to kind of not outsource that if we do not have to, if it's within the countries that we are working with. If not, there's different agencies that they can help assist with that as well.
Which is one mouthful, but a lot more work, I can imagine, throughout the course of the year.
Yes.
One thing we were speaking about before we really began the session was the broad stroke brush that H-2A gets painted with so often. It's pretty maligned in the news and in the general media. But can you talk about maybe some experiences you've had with the program and seeing how it provides opportunity to a lot of folks. Like we spoke of a few here, even just mitigating undocumented immigration and allowing for more legitimate, safer, more rewarding opportunities to enter the country. I'd love to hear your take on all that.
Most definitely, unfortunately, what we spoke about earlier is, what we do see in the news are your bad actors, anybody taking advantage of these individuals. And unfortunately, we'll run into that from time to time. But looking at the numbers that are getting certified each year of the hundreds and thousands of workers that are coming over, it is the minority that are getting taken advantage of. It is a win-win program. I've been throughout Mexico, Central America, and meeting with these workers when the U.S. Department of Labor is setting a prevailing wage of $16, $17 an hour, an adverse effect wage rate. It changes lives for these individuals, and they're, in order for them to be able to send their children to school and build in their communities in their home countries, it's a very, very good wage where they can maybe make something similar to that, in a day's time that you're making in an hour here in the United States. And that's their incentive to leave their families for 6, 8, 10 months out of the year and then return home. That's when I first started, about 20 years ago, the majority of my time was traveling abroad and meeting with these individuals and completing their visa application forms to present them to the U.S. consulates and embassies. And they're more grateful for the position. I know, there's a question about abscondment, and of course there's bad apples on their side as well that take advantage of the program and just had full intentions to go live with their family in California or something like that. But it's far and in between, because of the opportunity that they have to enter the country legally and make a really good living. Granted, they're sending majority of their money home to their families. They have free housing. They're here to work, and many times we'll see the complaints of not working enough hours if you're not working them enough. So that's one thing that we have heard from employers. We want to make sure that we keep them busy, and rightfully so, in the time that they're here. So.
And I'm sure go ahead,
If there
Bubba.
is time, I have another question. Suppose during a busy season or a week, are we allowed to offer them work more than 8 hours? And if so,
Yes.
what would be the remuneration guideline?
It was really that's just your guideline on what you indicate how much work you will have during your peak season. So what we refer to as a job order is basically stating what the standard work hours will be. And we always want to allow flexibility for additional time. If we're in your standard, it may not be 8 hours a day, maybe 10 hours a day, maybe 12, whatever the regular work day is for you, tailored to your business. But there's no limit in regards to how much more they can work. The main goal is to draft your job order, which is going to be what's advertised to U.S. domestic workers, as close to what your daily activities will be when they're working that season for you. Because one thing you do not want to do is say, I'm only working 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, a 40-hour work week, when in turn you're working, 60 hours every week during your peak season, because the U.S. Department of Labor is going to view that as not displaying the job correctly to a U.S. applicant that may have wanted that position, because if they could have worked 60 hours a week, they could have made more money and they may apply for that position. So your goal is to get it as close as possible. Of course, there's going to be fluctuation there. There's going to be weather, activities and those types of things, but you want to display that job as close as you possibly can to what the ideal situation will be throughout the season.
I have a question regarding the adverse effect wage rate. So is that effectively the minimum wage for hiring workers through this program?
Yes, that will be the bare minimum. You can offer more you can offer more, especially, if you're looking at the adverse effect wage rate comes at $17 an hour and you've been participating in the program for many years, you may have some really key guys that are making more than that. The way you can do that is you still have to disclose on that job order what your wage range will be, but it will set the minimum, regardless. It will not let you go below that, but the maximum you can set a wage range. If you're paying $17 to $19 an hour and the adverse effect wage rate for your state is $16.35, you can state 17 to 19, but again, it's just disclosing the fact of what you will actually be doing to make sure those domestic workers have that equal opportunity.
Yeah, so I guess I'm curious about sort of the philosophy behind that, because in New Jersey, we have a agricultural minimum wage of $12 an hour, right? And so if our essentially H-2A minimum wage is $16.50, there's a $4.50 increase in the minimum wage for H-2A workers over the domestic workers. And with the H-2A, you're also paying for housing, transportation costs. So what's the philosophy behind having a higher minimum wage significantly? I mean, that's like a 35% increase in minimum wage for H-2A workers versus, you know, a significantly lower domestic minimum wage.
And I think that is why the corresponding employment provision is within the H-2A program, to make sure that these wages are not adversely affecting local domestic workers as well. So if you are participating and any of those domestic workers are doing the same or similar job duties, they're going to have to be paid the adverse effect wage rate as well. I'm not saying it's right, but that's how they justify the fact that the H-2A workers are not going to be paid more than local domestic workers, just because there's a different wage level for agricultural employees in that state.
Gotcha, okay.
So interested employers, what's their first step if they want to dive in more, get engaged with H-2A?
Yeah, please reach out. I have my contact information up earlier, and happy to Devin, share that as much as you like. We can send you over kind of a breakdown of the very basics. We try to send you over kind of in steps of what the first steps of the process will be, what the financial responsibilities are in regards to membership cost, and then transportation, housing, kind of touching base on some of the things we looked at today. I'm happy to send those. Reach out to me directly and we can send that information out, or you can log into our website and request an information packet that way. So that is first step if anybody would like to join or additional information on our H-2A program.
And naturally, as FEWA is a member of NOFA New Jersey, we're going to kick any inquiries over to y'all, but it's good to know where folks can jump in. If there's a piece of advice you can give to prospective employers utilizing H-2A, if there's a common misstep that they take, or, you know, a stumble block, something they stumble upon frequently, is there something that comes to mind that you could help them avoid?
It's going to be housing. The very first issue is, you know, we know we need workers. We know what the labor market is looking like. Testing the labor market, proving a temporary need, all that's really just documentation and paperwork we can help you through. Setting aside what type of housing you're going to look at, you know, what the expenses are to make sure it makes sense for you. Every region, every area is different, you know, depending on where you're located. But seeing how you can set that up, and we're happy to share what the guidelines are in regards to on the farm housing and that type of information. Just make sure we have a plan for that. You cannot get past the state workforce agency or the U.S. Department of Labor, which is the very first step of the process in obtaining certification, unless your housing is set up. So they're only going to certify you for the amount of housing you have available. You know, so if your house is only 2 bedrooms and, you know, a certain amount of square footage with common living area, you're only going to get certified for 4 workers, even though you may need 10. So, you know, that's very first step, is making sure to have an idea of how you're going to handle the housing situation.
Can you, I don't know if this is the appropriate venue, but can you maybe touch on the farm labor stabilization funding that's coming down the pipeline and how producers can engage with that? Or is that restricted to folks that are already utilizing H-2A programs?
As far as I know, it's not restricted to folks that are already utilizing the H-2A program. It's supposed to be some funding that can help with the expenses that are encountered in the program. And I know the USAID just extended that deadline. I know it was today, actually. I looked it up earlier, and they extended that through January 3rd. It's a grant program to apply for assistance in helping employers and agricultural employers get involved in the H-2A program to bring in workers legally. So they're allowing different types of funding to assist in, you know, even housing expenses, membership costs, you know, the cost that it takes to file all the appropriate documentation, transportation cost as well. Some of the things that you cannot use the funding for is, if you're looking like to lease to own property, those types of things, so there's some restrictions and guidelines in there. I just know the deadline has been extended through January 3rd, and I know they did a very good webinar. USAID did a very good webinar on how to participate as well and how to apply for those grants.
Cool. Thank you. Any other thoughts from the crowd?
I have one final question. So I also know that there's a way that workers can bring like a spouse and a minor, and minor children with them. I know that with that visa, the spouse is not legally able to work. When it comes to housing, is the employer obligated to provide housing for the family members as well? Or if they, and also is the employer, what's the employer's role in whether or not someone can or decides not to apply for a spouse or child to travel with?
So the visa you're referring to is an H-4 visa, and that allows the immediate family of an H-2A or H-2B visa holder to apply for their family member. They have to be married legally, and we have ran into that before, to where they don't have a legal marriage certificate. They have to be their children under the age of 18. But it does become an issue with H-2A because of the housing. If an employer is not responsible for provide housing for the entire family, of course, but if they do, again, that equal opportunity has to be made available to have family housing for everybody, and that does become a very sticky situation when it comes to agriculture, H-2A program. Now, the H-4 visa applicant can only apply, an employer has to give authorization to be able to schedule an appointment, because they have to be utilizing the approved petition that's available to the employer. So that family member could not just go schedule their own appointment without the access to the petition of the employer. So normally if we were scheduling the appointments for the H-2A workers, we'll just say Mexico, and we would have to schedule their appointments for the H-4 as well. And of course, that information will come from the employer. But the housing situation does become very, very an issue on the agricultural side. So even if that family, for instance, even if the individual H-2A family member who does bring up their family chooses not to live in the housing provided by the employer, that housing position has to be vacant throughout the entire period of certification, because he always has to have a place to live regardless of what's happening or where his other living arrangements are. Your daily transportation is from your employer provided housing, so you don't have to go pick them up wherever they're deciding to live, but they always have to have a place to stay regardless of where they choose to live.
Thank you.
Good question.
Well, if nobody has any other pressing questions, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. You're clearly a wealth of information, and FEWA is definitely a resource that we could all use or refer other growers to that are interested in H-2A. Drop the link to FEWA Global in the chat. And Arnulfo, if you want to drop your email, I don't know if you want to drop your email or.
Sure, no problem at all. Yeah, I'm happy
Folks.
to put my direct contact information in there for you. No problem. Then also, Devin, I'm happy to circulate, because I knew a few things that came up where, kind of the approved country list in regards to H-2A program. I can circulate that, and then also about the grant program that's coming up. I can circulate some resources to that after the fact.
That would be great. Yeah, we can get that shared with all the RSVPs.
Perfect.
even though the real deal showed up tonight. You four are awesome. Appreciate you actually RSVPing and then showing up. All right, so if anybody wants that information, it's now in the chat.
Let me send my email address to.
Mhm. Awesome. And yeah, thank you again. I appreciate
No problem.
you.
Thank you. Hope you have a great evening, and please reach out if I can help in any way.
And
Thank
right
you
back
so
at
much,
you.
Arnulfo.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Much.
Bye. Thank you, Devin.
See you, Ariana.
Very much. It was a nice talk.
Cool. Thanks, Babu. Have a good night.